Okay, hello everyone and welcome to Handmade Hero, the show where we code a complete game live, on stream, on Twitch. No engines, no libraries. We show absolutely all of the code that is necessary to run a game in a modern setting. Ladies and gentlemen, I have been away for a week and a half due to unforeseen circumstances. And so today, I think we have sort of the highly dubious situation of, will I even remember what the code is doing? Right? You know, it's been paged out. I obviously work on. I have a full-time job, so you know, I don't. I don't only get to think about Handmade Hero. I have to actually be working on other things as well. So it's going to be rather interesting. Now, when we left off on the last episode, what I did was I basically showed how you end up with this iterator precision problem, and I showed how to fix it by doing back calculation, sort of implicitly calculating things instead of doing them as what's actually called a digital differential analyzer, I believe, sort of the idea of adding things incrementally. So we kind of covered that, and I was going to say, okay, we should probably also do volume that way, and I was going to do that the next day. We don't really need to do that now. We have a to-do in there. If we want to fix that with the volume, we can. It doesn't really cause us any problems. We're not actually hearing any problems with it right in the sound mixer. So I think what would probably be better to do today, since we're starting a new week after being out for so long, I think it would be better just to start something fresh and just assume that the sound mixer is good enough for now. And obviously, as with all of the parts of the engine, if we come to a point in the game development where we find that the engine does not do something we need, we will just go ahead and revise it at that point. And that's generally a good idea anyway, because you don't want to go spending a lot of time implementing engine features that you don't ever use, or implementing engine features in a way that you don't need. And that's why, of course, I always say you want to do things in an exploratory fashion, so you kind of only do things as you need them. And that way it guarantees that you're not spending a ton of time on stuff that just doesn't need to happen, or spending a bunch of time on something and you make it in a way that turns out to not actually be appropriate for the task. And so we've tried very hard to take that approach as we've been sort of building our engine here, exploring things, and pulling in new things as we go, only when we can kind of see a real use case and a real way in which they can occur. And trying to keep things simple in cases where we don't feel like we yet have enough information because we just don't want to rat hole on something that may turn out to be nothing or unimportant to the final game. At the end of the day, it's worth noting that no matter what you do when you're programming, when you're making a game, every hour that you spend programming is going towards something. And if that something doesn't end up in the final game, you wasted that hour. And so it really does pay to make sure that when you are doing your programming, you try to do it in a way such that you don't spend a lot of time working on things that never see the light of day. And again, that's sort of what we're trying to do here. So with that in mind, what I'd like to do is get back to the asset system. We wrote the sound mixer just so we could see what the needs might be for the asset system. And so we will probably come at the sound system from another direction a little later on when we actually go to add sound to the game in some kind of meaningful way where we want to actually play sound, ambient sounds, and some music and stuff. We'll put that into the game, and then we'll revisit the sound mixer and see, are there things that we need to change? So we're sort of looking at it, if you will, from two different sides. And the side that we need to look at right now was, what does the sound mixer probably need from the asset system, right? And so that way we can finish up our asset system. Later on, when we go look at the sound mixer from the other direction, it'll be, what does the game code want from the sound system? And what we'll do there is we probably won't change the sound mixer much, because obviously it's pretty straightforward how it works. And we now know that it lines up with the asset mixer well, so we like that. But the interface to the sound mixer, like the playing sound structs and that stuff, that will probably change dramatically, because really right now that's only the very minor sort of layer, the simplest possible thing we could put to have sounds play. That's what we put in place there, right? And so we will have a chance to kind of revisit the mixer again a little later, and not maybe so much about what the mixer's actually doing in the actual mixing code, which is probably fine, mostly the way it is now, but in terms of how we might want to drive that mixing code, we will probably build that out a little bit more. But again, don't want to do that right now, because the better time to do that would be when we actually go to add a little bit of a soundscape to the game, because that's the time when we will actually know what those things should look like. All right, so philosophy out of the way, I'd like to go take a look at the asset system now and sort of page that back in to our brains and talk about what we want that to do, and maybe start kind of writing some code that will start to push the test code that we have right now out into sort of a place where we can start to define that asset system, okay? Before I start, in case we do get to programming today, because I'm Blackboard for a little bit to talk about what we're going to do and give you some of the background of it, as I always do when we start a new section. But if we get through that and we start programming today, today is that day 147, which means that if you're trying to follow along home with the source code, if you've pre-ordered the game on handmadehero.org and you want to start with the source code I'm starting with today, unpack day 146's source code. That is what I am working with, and that is what you will want to work with if you want to match my code. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about the asset system a little bit and what we want to have happen here, because we've done the work now of defining sort of how the asset system works. You know what I should do, by the way? Let's zoom out and just look at what this looks like. It's like very long lines, and it kind of goes, oops, and then it kind of goes in the thing. I wonder if we should start a new like branch of this tree. It's right, you can kind of see it's this long skinny thing, and it just goes down and down and down. Like it's crazy, right? I wonder if we should just start a new one somewhere up here and like kind of start a new like branch going downwards. So here it is, right? Here's some of this stuff. It's kind of funny. I don't know. I don't even know why we save all this, but I'm gonna go ahead and start it like right here, or maybe like right here. This is gonna be it. So all right, so I come in here, and let's make this up to sort of the size that it would be. There we go, day 74. And I'm just going to come over here, right? And there's going to be my new day. Okay. So here's day 147, right? All right. So this is asset files. We already, I'm pretty happy with our asset system's actually kind of cool, I think, already. The tag-based matching stuff is pretty sweet, in my opinion. Like, I really kind of like the way that worked out, and I think it's going to be interesting to see how it goes going forwards. But what we need to do now is take this, to sort of completion and say, well, we've got two things we got to do. We've got to figure out how we want to define our asset files, and then the other thing we have to do is figure out how we're going to deal with memory management in the asset system. Because, like I said, the asset system is kind of a special case, really, in our system of we want it to be able to sort of act like a virtual memory system, right? Kind of like the operating system's virtual memory system, only with more predictability and more control for us. And so what we wanted to be able to do is when in the game we are working with assets, what we want to be able to do is we want to be able to sort of have a potentially giant asset footprint, like 16 gigabytes uncompressed of assets or something like this, right? But if the user only has like 2 gigabytes of memory or something, or 4 gigabytes of memory, we want to take however much of that we're affording to assets and use that as sort of like a scattered window into all of the assets that we have, and make sure that we're only pulling in the ones that we need for the situation of the game as it stands, right? Now, will we ever actually use that functionality? I don't know. It's definitely the sort of thing that I'm sort of showing you because it's something that I want to teach, and it's something that you often do want. So we're going to write the asset system as if it will need to page, but will we ever necessarily get to the number, to the size of assets where this becomes a problem? That's not necessarily clear, right? We may end up only having 4 gigabytes of assets total, uncompressed or something like this. And so the game never and everyone who runs the game has 8 gigabytes of memory. I don't know, right? It could happen. But again, I kind of want to show this because I want the game to be scalable in that way. And so we're going to say that one of our goals is to make it so that we can simply set a working set size, and then no matter what that working set size is, you can have as many assets as you ever want. If the artists pile in 64 gigs of assets, as long as you've got somewhere to store them, it will work, right? So that's one thing we have to handle. That is the harder of the two things. The simpler of the two things that we need to handle is the asset files. They're a little related, but right now I just want to focus on the asset file part of it. And what that is that's moving the thing that we've got right now, which is a collection of sort of random bitmaps on the drive, random wave files on the drive, and a little bit of code in the game that says which ones of those match to which ones, to which like IDs and which segments or whatever. What I want to do is move from that to the concept that we've got a unified structure on the disk that represents all of the asset information that we actually need to process, and so we can, distribute the game as one nice packed file that has all of the stuff in it and is easy for the game to get around and load out of and whatever, right? So let me talk about that for a bit and explain to you sort of what the goals are here and how it works and what's going to happen. Okay, so as you know, what we've decided to do is we kind of have our asset system kind of expands in tiers, if you will. On the game side of things, right, so I'll just say here's what the game code is actually thinking in terms of, right? The game's code is thinking in terms of two sets of things, right? It's thinking in terms of types and tags, right? So it will ask for a particular type of thing, like a hero, and then it will ask with tags. And the tags will be things like, maybe I want a male and female heroes. So there's like gender tags or something where I can say which one of those I wanted. And then if the artists have put in multiple female or multiple male or any combination of the two. Maybe we've got a bisexual hero or whatever. Well, that's not really gender. That's sexual orientation. Let's say we have sexual orientation. We have straight heroes, gay heroes, bisexual heroes. Maybe we have everyone on the Kinsey scale. So like you can be from 0. I don't know. Did it go from 0 to 5? Or was it 0 to 10? I don't remember what the Kinsey scale was. It's probably all been debunked by now anyway. But let's suppose we've got that. What we want to be able to do is have the artist put in anything that we want to match these tags. And then when the game code says, I want a hero that's on the Kinsey scale of 0.2, what it will do is it will find the closest hero sprites that match whatever that is, right? And so we can have that for everything. Hair color maybe is on there, let's say. Maybe we've got stuff like age, is the hero 20 or is the hero 50 or is the hero 4, right? So that's the way that the game code thinks about things. And the reason that it thinks about them that way is because we're trying to decouple the game code from the actual asset table, right? So the asset table is a thing that actually has individual assets in them, right? So there's things in here where we've got actual bitmaps, okay? And those bitmaps are like, the 30-year-old hero and the 50-year-old hero and the 4-year-old hero and whatever, right? And we don't want the game code to have to think in terms of specific bitmaps. We want it to be able to think in terms of types and tags, where it can just say, you know what, I've got it, I want a hero, here's the stuff I know about them. I don't want to care whether the artist drew exactly that thing or not. I want you to just get me back whatever the artist drew that's as close as possible to representing this thing, right? And that way, these two things can be updated independently. The game code can start to think more about stuff as necessary and add more tags and more parameters to those tags. And the asset table can be updated by the artist by adding new things. So if the artist sees the game as like, oh, I don't like the fact that the old hero still looks kind of young, I'm going to make an even older model for the hero and put that in there, right? You don't have to update the game code at all. The game code stays exactly the same. You don't even have to recompile it. You just update the asset table, and the asset table will now have an older looking hero that it pulls out and allows you to sort of make a more accurate depiction of what the game was actually expressing in terms of its gameplay variables, right? So this part, we've done a good job speccing. I'm happy with it. I think that's good. And this part, the asset table, we actually have kind of specified. And you can see it in the code if we actually look. I haven't opened the editor yet, so let's go ahead and actually do that. But if you actually look at the code in Handmade asset.h, you can see that we've actually done a reasonable job defining what this tables actually look like. You can see that we've got sort of a set of bitmaps, and they have these infos associated with them, sound infos and bitmap infos. Those are the two things that tell you about the actual asset, like, you know, whatever, how big it is, what the bitmap file on disk was, you know, the stuff that's necessary to kind of load it in and use it or whatever, right? And then we have the tags, and the tags are all of sort of those, again, those things that we've tagged assets with. And then we have the assets themselves, which use the tags, right? So the assets say, here's my tags, you know, points into this table, right? Excuse me. So what I've been kind of doing there as we've been going through is working out that structure, right? I've been trying to work out what that actual structure is, and we've kind of sort of made it here, and this is what we actually want our file to represent, right? We want our file to be able to represent these specific things so that when we load the game, we have all of this information that is what we know that we actually want. And so let's go over what these things actually are and talk about how we're going to store them on the disk and so on. So they're kind of in reverse order here in terms of who, you know, in terms of who references what. Reverse order is kind of tends to be a thing in C because since C doesn't requires forward declaration, right? C requires you to define or to declare something before you use it. Typically, C programmers get in the habit of defining things in reverse order, right? If tags are referenced by assets, you tend to talk about the assets second and the tags first, right? You go from the thing that does the least referencing the thing that does the most, and that's why they're kind of sorted in this order. That's neither here nor there. That's just a sort of C programmer idiom, right? So anyway, if you take a look at asset type, right, you can see how we defined it, and what it is an asset type is just a set of assets that all correspond to the same logical thing as the game might ask for it with an enum. So for example, if the game asks for a shadow, and you know, again, we don't know that these are the types we're actually going to want, they're just ones we put together for testing. But if the game asks for a shadow, then what it's going to do is it's going to look up the asset type shadow in that array, and it's going to see how many assets it has that are of type shadow, right? So if you take a look at how that actually works here, you know, we take a look at what this asset table thing actually does. What that means, I'm going to just draw it out. What that means is we have asset type kind of as our most primal, this is our most important step of the classification in the file, right? We've got asset type. And what asset type is it's indexed, right? We've got 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, so on, right? It's indexed here, and these are actually become enumerants, right? We define these as enumerants so they're easier to use in code, but those enumerants are still, they're just corresponding to a flat table, right? You know, and so this right here may be shadow, right? This right here may be hero, who knows what they are. You can see them here. Where are they? There they are, right? You can see them here. And we have like head, cape, torso, that sort of stuff, all that goodness. Right? So hero would be a bad example. It's really more like head, cape, torso, right? So we have these asset types, and what the asset types do is they themselves, you know, inside here, actually are a sub-addressing. They're sort of referencing into a separate table, and that separate table is the assets table, right? And if this looks a little bit like a database to you, that's because it is kind of like a database. When things get stored on disk, they often tend to look like databases because, hey, guess what? That's what a database is. It was a thing that was designed to represent data cleanly on disk. Anyway, we've got sort of a concept of we've got a first and a count kind of a thing here, right? And so the way that we store the asset ranges is by, in this table here where we've got our actual assets, right? And again, the assets are by number as well, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. What we do is for any given one of these, we say, all right, first there is a number in here which says the first asset, right, that corresponds to that type. Maybe that first asset's down here. Let's say it's 4, right? So it's saying this one. And then it's got some kind of a count that says, oh, there are 3 assets total, right? And so 5 and 6 are all also this one, right? So it kind of refers to this range, right? This 3 lets us know that range. So what that means is in the asset array, we know that we've kind of packed them in here. We've got these assets, right? If that makes sense. Okay. Now, we have something that we want to consider at this point. And that something is how exactly we want this loading to work. And I'll just explain to you why there's something to be aware of here. The thing that we need to be aware of here is that if, let's say we had 2 asset files instead of just one, right? If we have one asset file that has all our assets in it, what I'm about to say doesn't make any sense. It doesn't matter. But suppose we were going to have 2. Well, when you use sort of convenient packed addressing like this, where you just kind of go, okay, all of the assets of one type occur at the same place in the table, right? The problem that you get with that is that you then lose the ability to have multiple discrete ranges of the same asset. If you only have one asset file, that's not really a problem, because at asset build time, you can always just make sure that the ranges are contiguous, and you might have a problem with incremental if you're trying to be incremental about how you link things, but since these are only the tables aren't very big, you can just rewrite them every time, that's not really that big a deal, blah, 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 right? But if you wanted to have multiple asset files, and for example, a case where you might want to do that is you've got the original assets from the game, and then you want to ship an expansion pack, right? I've got the original assets for Handmade Hero, and then I want to ship Handmade Hero 2, I guess I should say Handmade Hero, DLC or something, Abner Coimbrae's chocolate wine expansion or whatever, right? And it's going to add a bunch of different chocolate wines to the game and all this sort of stuff, right? Well, the original game maybe already had chocolate wine, right? And so it had some kind of entry into the table that said, down here it said chocolate wine, right? So when the game wanted chocolate wine and asked for chocolate wine, right, it got this range back. And it said, oh, chocolate wine starts at entry 16 and it goes for 7 entries. There are 7 types of chocolate wine, right? But now we come here and we've got, this is asset file 1, right? This is the original assets, right? This is the original. Now we come in here and we say, oh, well, okay, but there's the Abner Coimbrae expansion, right, pack or something, right? So we've got the expansion pack, and that's just all chocolate wine. So it's got a thing in here in the asset type table, and it says, oh, okay, yeah, there's chocolate wine, right? And it goes, from 1 to 9, and it's got 930 different kinds of chocolate wine in it or whatever, right? Well, the problem is now there's no one single range that actually has all of that stuff in it. So what we really want to do, I think, in order to support expansion packs and stuff like that, is we want to make the asset type table on disk be a little bit different than what it is in memory, and we probably want to merge on load, right? Do some kind of a merge on load type of a thing. And what that would look like, right, is we would say, okay, in the asset table, in these files, instead of having the asset table go 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 and having the index imply the enumerant, what we should probably do is have the enumerant stored in it. So entry 0 actually then says, what enumerant are you actually referring to? Are you referring to chocolate wine? Are you referring to, what are you talking about? And then what we'll do is when we load those asset type tables in, we will merge the same chocolate wine from this one, chocolate wine from that one. We'll merge them together into a contiguous array in memory, so our game can be nice and efficient in memory and have everything stored all in the same place when it has to deal with chocolate wine. But on disk, we can have multiple different chocolate wine sets. And this also helps with incremental linking in the sense that when we build our asset file, we can incrementally add on to the end of it if we want to, and we can add on to the end of the asset table without having to really rewrite or shuffle anything, right? Because we just add a new entry later on for whatever that thing was. So I think that's the way that we would want to do it, right? I think that's what we would want to do. So I'm just pointing that out. So anyway, yeah, we've got assets. We've got asset types that refer to ranges of assets, right? And the assets themselves are really just things that refer to what, first of all, what you need to actually load the asset, right? So we've got the, like, whether it's a bitmap or a sound, it's going to have this info struct, right, associated with it. So one of the things it's going to have is, like, it's got the asset info, whether it's a bitmap or a sound, and that would be more expansive than what's shown here, right? Because this char file name thing would go away because we wouldn't be referencing files externally anymore. We would be actually including the data for the file directly into our asset pack file. So, you know, we'd actually have a lot more data here. We'd have the offset probably in the file where the data chunk lives. We'd have how big it was. We'd have the metadata for it. So for example, for a bitmap, we'd have what its width and height were, that kind of stuff, right? So, you know, and sound, we'd have how many channels it has, all that stuff, right? So these infos structs will be more expressive once we remove file name from them and kind of take them up to sort of a full directory metadata entry for this thing, right? So the assets have two parts, like I said. They've got the tags, right? And they've got the info. The info is relatively straightforward. It's just everything we need to define the actual specific sound or bitmap that we want. And the tags, like we said before, are really just, again, another reference into an array of tags. And the tags, like we saw here, right, we've kind of got the tag up here. Asset tag is a very simple thing. An asset tag is nothing more than an int and a float, right? It's just, that's all it is. So these are just arrays of ints and floats. So this can be stored on disk directly. This can be stored on disk directly. This can be stored on disk directly with the enum kind of addition. And when we load these out, we will pretty much be able to just flat load them exactly as they are. Modulo, if we want to, you know, compress them for loading or something like that as well, we could do that. But other than that, we can just basically load them in and directly use them. The only part that I think we're going to want to do the only part that I think we're going to want to have is kind of like actually interpretation step that actually looks at the data before sort of putting it into use is this enum part, where I think instead of having the asset type table being loaded and used directly, we want to consider the asset table as something the asset type table as something we load, interpret, and then throw away. Because we want to build basically a merged asset type table from the assets from the sort of multiple tables that we see in the actual files. So I think that's how we want things to work. And like I said, there's really not that much to understand here. It's very, very straightforward how we're actually going to do these things. I think most of them will look on disk exactly like they do in memory, minus any kind of compression that we do to compress the tables. You know, we'd probably stick eventually some kind of like an LZ compressor on there or something, just to show how to kind of to reduce the sizes of those things or whatever, even though really they're never going to be all that big probably. But point being, modulo that, there's really not a whole lot else that we would need to do. And so looking back here at these sorts of things, what we could do is now start to define what we want that asset file to actually look like and how we want to actually load it and process it. Now, if you look at what we were doing down here, you can see we wrote this code that, you know, if you look at what this code is here in allocate game assets, really this code that you see here, this is all, and I said this multiple times when we were writing it, this is all just code that simulates building essentially the asset file in memory, right? This is essentially code that's pretending that we had one of these asset files already made, excuse me, right? And then it goes ahead and uses it in place, right? So what I'd like to do to kind of start us working here, I'm going to leave that as it is because, you know, we've got the game running, and for those of you who are kind of playing along at home, you may want to always have the game in a running state. So I'm not going to break it. I'm just going to leave it kind of operating as it is. But what I would like to do is sort of break that part off, a clone of it, if you will, and make a program whose only job it is to make a dummy asset pack file that we can start loading, right? And so I want to do essentially exactly the same thing that this thing was sort of faux doing here. And I'm going to do that sort of outside, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up our build.bat, and I'm going to give myself another piece of code, right? I'm going to give ourselves another sort of build target, if you will, right? And so you can see here we've got our various build targets. The only one that I'm really concerned with here is probably this one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little thing in here that's called like asset file builder build. And you know, this probably, we won't really probably do a whole lot with this code because, again, it's only for getting things spec'd and for testing. But, you know, for the time being, I would like it to be in here as part of the build. So what I'm going to do is define a little thing called like handmade test, or maybe, I don't know if it should have test in front of it. Maybe something like test asset builder, something like that, right? And I don't care about it producing a map file or any of those other sorts of things. We can just go ahead and have it do the standard stuff that it does. So I'm going to pop back over here. I don't know if we want to separate out things into like test directories. I don't think we're going to have enough for that. So I think what I'll do is just put it right in here. And I'm not going to put the handmade sort of precursor on it so that it'll just be clear that it's just a piece of test code and not something that's part of the build proper. So here we go. I'm going to make that there. And I'll just go ahead and make kind of a standard boilerplate thing here, like one might normally have, something like this, right? And I'll get it compiling. So let's see. Oh, right, don't want to do that for main. There we go. And so now I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that in our build directory, we should now have a test asset builder.exe, and there we do have exactly that. If I do test asset builder, I don't know if we added that to the path. I don't think we did yet. So I have to do build backslash. You can see that I can run it just fine. And so basically what I've done here is I've made a stub. Now, a lot of people ask me things like, because on Handmade Hero, we don't use libraries and we don't use an engine. We don't use anything. Pretty much we do everything from scratch. And part of that is obviously for educational purposes, but another part of it is that's actually how I develop. Like my code base at work right now has almost no libraries in it whatsoever. It isn't even really using an STB library at this point. It's literally 100% from scratch, using absolutely no libraries. It doesn't even link with any Windows libraries besides kernel 32. It's like the most non-dependent code base I think I've ever done in my life. But a lot of people often, so it is true, like I actually do things that way oftentimes. But a lot of people ask me, like, what libraries would you use if you were going to use them, or do you really never use libraries, that sort of stuff. And the answer is, typically I don't use libraries in cases where it's code I want to last. Because my experience has been, if you ever use a library in code that you want to last, you will just end up with a maintenance nightmare on your head, on your hands, as that library either fails to support the platforms that you need it to support, fails to continue to be updated, introduces bugs, has bugs, whatever. So in the code that I ship, I tend not to want any libraries in it. And again, sometimes there are exceptions like the STB libraries that I think are well done, and that impose a very low overhead on you. Sometimes those can be worth it. But in cases where I don't care if the code lasts at all, then have at it. And so in the case of this test asset builder, for example, this would be a perfect example of a time when it'd be fine to use libraries, right? And so, for example, I'm totally happy to use the C standard library here, right? Because I don't care at all. This is just code to build a test thing. There's absolutely no reason for me to even think about anything that I, or even care how it's, as long as I know how to use the library, it's not going to cause me a headache right now, I would say go for it. So this guy can be written in just standard vanilla C. I don't care at all about it, and I'm totally happy to use like standard IO for the file IO and all that sort of stuff, because I don't foresee any reason why I should care about that, right? That's an example of a time when I'm totally happy to use libraries and would use libraries. And I hope maybe that helps answer that question with an actual example that people can relate to. So what I'd like to do here is write something that's going to write out one of these test asset files, right? And so if we take a look at what we were doing here, we have this sort of stuff. We've got all this here, right? What I'd like to do is basically recreate exactly what we are doing in the game in a file. And once we have that, then I'm hoping that we will be able to swap out, like basically do a giant if zero here, right? Swap out the code that's creating the stuff on the fly with something that just loads from the file. And then all of this stuff can just be vaporized. Goodbye, right? And then we are left with something that is exactly what we wanted, an asset file that we can just load, and we can pour our assets into it all we want, and the game can load them. And the other nice thing about doing this way is for people who do not want to use the art assets that I ship and who are making their own stuff, or who are going to make a game of their own after Handmade Hero that works similarly or whatever, this could serve as the starting point for your asset packer, however you wanted to do it from whatever source arts that you have, since it's going to be different from how I'm going to pack them or what art assets we use and so on. All right, so first things first. What I want to do here is I want to start by saying, okay, we're going to write an asset pack file, and so I guess we really don't need to talk about multiple files ever. We could just have a single file called out, right? That's going to be the file that we actually write to. And we're just going to open one of those and write the whole thing to it and then close, right? That's all we're really going to do here. So we can do that, and what we're going to do is we're going to want to add all sort of these, add these things to it, and then sort of write them out, right? So what we may have to do in the interim is, I don't know if we want to try and do this in sort of a single pass method, or we want to build them up as we go. I should probably if zero these out as well. There we go. But what I will do here is just say, all right, let's go ahead and take this out file. We'll fopen, again, this is just using the C standard library to do file IO. So we'll fopen a file. This will just be called like test.handmade hero assets. I don't know. Does anyone have an objection to HHA as the file extension? Hopefully not. So we'll just go ahead and do that. If you've never used the C standard library before, again, this is just its way of doing file stuff. It's just like create file in Win32 when we covered that. Fopen is just saying, I want to open a file with this name, and you pass it what kind of operations you're going to do on it. W means I'm going to write to it. B means it is binary. And this W is also the part of what that implies, in addition to just the fact that you're trying to write to it, is also that you expect it to kind of erase the file if it already exists. So it's got like an implicit overwrite concept in there. So what we're going to do here is we're going to say, okay, if we are able to open the file, then we want to do a bunch of stuff to it, and then fclose it, which says we're done with the file, right? That's, again, the sort of close handle equivalent like we looked at Win32 in the C runtime library. So we open the file, we're going to do a bunch of writes to it, and then we're going to close it. And that's really all that's going to happen here. Nothing too fancy. And so the way that we're going to do this, I think until we have sort of a reason not to, I guess what we should do is just kind of gather up all the stuff that we did here. I think because we want the flexibility, I'm going to say let's just go ahead and define it first, and then do the write at the end. That seems like maybe the easiest thing to do, right? So we're going to assume that we have all of these things defined here, and then we're going to loop over all of them, writing them out into the asset pack file as necessary. I don't really know if that's the smartest thing to do. Maybe we want it to be incremental. I'm kind of torn how we want to write this, because if we want the asset pack file in general to be able to be appended to incrementally, then that would argue for just setting up the code in that way to begin with so that we actually practice that. But if we want it to just be something where you tend to do the compile on the right and you don't update it incrementally, then, I don't know. I really don't. Because there's other things to think about. Well, you know what? I don't care. We'll just go this way and we'll see how it goes. If we want to add more stuff to it later, we always can, right? Okay. So what I'm going to do here is I'm not going to care at all about this code in any way. Like, this is going to be absolute crap code that really just doesn't matter at all because it's only for speccing out the file thing. And so what I would like to do here is probably just say we're going to have these bitmap assets or whatever, right? So I want to go ahead and just make sort of a way of actually of sort of holding those, right? So I have the file name. So this is just a bitmap asset, I guess. I'm going to have the file name there. I'm going to have whatever that offset thing is, right? That sort of alignment, I guess, is what we called it, right? I'm going to have those two things that are going to be specified. And then I've got these asset types here. So really this code is pretty much going to mirror the code that we had before, right? In fact, I probably can just grab it. I don't even know if I need to really do any work. I can probably just clone this code exactly because all of this code is all debug anyway, and all would be deleted from here eventually either way. So if I go ahead and put this stuff in here, here we go with our various things where we add bitmap info and all that sort of stuff. We can simplify this a little bit, right? We can simplify this a little bit by just saying, okay, we only need the file name and the align percentage here. I guess, let me look and see how we do that. We don't even need those slot IDs for the most part, but okay. So what we want to do here, right, is we want to take this code and we're basically just trying to buffer up all of the stuff that we need so that we can then look at it and write out the tables for it as well as the data, right? So if we take a look at these here, yeah, I guess that's this. We probably want to change a little bit to the way these work, but we'll hold off on that for a second. So yeah, so all of this stuff is probably just fine. We can get rid of the referencing of the assets here and just actually pretend all these things are global variables because they can be global variables that just hang out in here, right? All of this code is going to be building things basically the same way, right? So I'm just going to literally just reappropriate this code because why not, right? So there we go. And debug add bitmap info can probably, like, that never gets called anywhere else, does it? That's not really a thing that happens. So what we should probably do is just have that be in here, right? Should probably just inline that. I don't even know why we made separate ones for it originally. It doesn't really seem like a good use of anyone's time or energy, but that's what we did. Who knows why? So I'll go ahead and paste those in there so we can port that in that way later. Okay. So when we do begin asset type, right, and then of course the other thing too is now all this debug code that we had in there, right, all this debug code comes out to here, right, like so. There we go. So yeah, we can change these guys. There we go. Yeah. Although we probably, I don't know if we want to actually keep our standard defines or anything there. We probably do, so I might as well just go ahead and grab those from Handmade platform, which I think we can just include, right? We should be able to do this, right? Handmade platform.h, and that'll work. Yes, in fact, it works quite nicely. So I think we can just do that. We can make these guys be R32s for now, like so. And then these guys can stay U32s. There we go. All right, so you can see what I did there. Basically what I did is I just said, all right, I want to use all the same types and stuff just to make it easier on myself. So I just went ahead and included Handmade platform.h because there's no reason why I can't, right? I can just use that same header file, even though we're not going to define any of the stuff from it. We can just use the type defs and stuff. All right, so then we've got, again, sort of the same stuff we had here where we've got the asset type and all that stuff, right? What we want to do here is pretty much just totally use all the same stuff that we have, right? I think all of this stuff is pretty much just what we want, right? So we can use it like so, and there we go. And then for our asset types here, these things, I guess, I don't know, we could even do, now that I think about it, we could even do something even more ridiculous for the moment. We could actually just include this asset type ID thing here. I don't really want to do that. So what I think I'm going to do is make that, I'm going to pull that out into a separate thing. There's going to be sort of a handmade asset ID, or sorry, I should say handmade asset type ID .h, and that thing is just going to have this, just this one thing, right? And that way it can be shared amongst various tools that might want it, such as this thing, without having to include everything else, right? So there's going to be a handmade asset type ID include here, and then this, this code can just include the same thing. So when it includes asset.h, first it can just include asset type ID.h, right? All right. Let's see how we're doing. We've got about 10 minutes left, maybe 15. I think we started about 5 minutes late. All right. So what we want to do now is we want to just clean this code up and make it so that it works with our new stuff here. So what we need to do is in handmade asset.h we had these arrays, right? And so what we want to do is actually pull out all those arrays that we had and just use them, right? So here we go. And what I want to do now is I want to say, well, you know what? We don't even really care about this stuff. So you know what? This is just a large number. Because again, don't care about this at all. Don't care about this code in any way. I guess asset slot is not necessary at all, right? We only really have these other things here, right? In our case, very large number doesn't even have to be big, right? Because we're only doing test, but in theory, there's going to be a lot of these things, right? If you were actually building the real asset pack file. So yeah, okay, so there's everything, right, that we actually have. We got assets, tags, sounds, and bitmaps, and asset types. So that's all the stuff that we actually have. And I guess the bitmap info and that stuff is the only stuff that we don't have here. And so we should, I guess we'll grab these, but we're going to modify these pretty heavily, obviously. And we'll do that, I guess, in a second. Well, we probably won't get to that today, actually. Okay, so yeah, so these things here are, again, we don't probably care about actually representing those IDs specifically, so that's fine. And we can make the align percentage into two different things to avoid having to pull v2s into this for no reason. And then I think we're good. So I'm going to go ahead and just finish kind of porting this out so it's no longer, oops, it's no longer working off of that assets bit. Let's see here. Cannot convert from asset star star. Oh, right. Got to remove that star. Okay. And align percentage x, align percentage y. Well, this is actually going to be this code right here. So I guess we don't really care about this much at all. So I guess this brings us to something that's kind of odd, which is that the slot ID, right, is sort of a thing that we use for maintaining like loading information stuff in the runtime game. And so in here, it actually means something a little different, right? In the actual file, slot ID really is talking about where the data actually is for this particular asset, right? Like where the actual information is. So I don't know that we really need slot ID anymore. What we're probably going to do is have something more like a U64 that's like data offset, right? You know what I mean? It's really going to be something that says, here's where the actual data for this asset lives. And there's not going to be like this sort of separate slot ID business for it, I don't think. because the slot ID is really something for the runtime to, because if you look back at the Handmade asset and you look at where the slot stuff is, where is that asset slot? You can see that this is not an on-disk thing. This is like just storing the state of the loaded, storing how something's been brought into memory and what its status is. And so I think really we don't care about that. So really right here we've just got this data offset, and the slot ID part of it, when we look at the asset, I'm trying to think, I guess I don't understand, why do you even need that slot ID? Because why did we even have a slot ID? Why isn't the slot just part of the asset? Am I missing something here? Because that seems very odd to me, right? That seems very odd. It just doesn't make any sense. In fact, I'm looking at this here, and I don't even understand why we did it that way. Maybe there was a reason, but I'm looking at this, and let's maybe this is something that I want to address right now even, because I think it's just dumb. So let's rem out that build, and we'll build our actual game here, right? Here we go. So looking at this, I just don't understand what the point is of the slot ID. It doesn't seem to really serve any purpose, right? Because you have the asset itself, and the asset itself should just have the asset slot in it, right? I mean, why wouldn't you do it that way? Like, what does the slot ID actually do for you? Because you could just return your own self. You could just return your own index. So the index into the asset array would just be the slot ID. Is that, I mean, sure seems obvious to me. I don't really know why you wouldn't do that. And even if you didn't want to include it in the asset structure itself, well, you could still just include it. You could just have a separate array, right? So I don't understand the point of that. So I'm just going to try that. I want to see what happens if instead I just do this, right? I want to know what happens. So what I'm doing here is, in order to test my theory that it doesn't matter, I'm going to let the compiler guide me towards figuring out whether it does or not. So what I've done is I've removed the two separate arrays that we had, replaced them with a single array, and I'm just going to let the compile errors guide me to see whether that was a good idea or not. So you can see here we've got this this thing where it's looking up into the bitmaps. So I'm just going to go ahead and change that to reference into slots, which should be exactly what we would want. Same thing here to reference into slots when we load a sound. Again, just same exact thing here. It's just looking into slots. I don't see any reason why that wouldn't work. Again, slots. When it loads, slots again. So all of these things can just, I mean, there's really no reason. We know the IDs don't collide if we don't want them to, right? Slots again. We've got sounds here, slots again. And so here we go. So yeah. So it looks to me, in my opinion, the only thing that we were getting from that is the fact that we could compress sort of we had bitmaps and sounds being addressed separately, right? So the number of bitmaps went from 0 to bitmap count, the number of sounds went from 0 to sound count, and so those were the slots. There are two overlapping sets of slots there, right? But I don't think that really buys anything, because why do we care about that, sort of compression? What we should do, I would argue instead, is just have the asset itself store a pointer to its info struct. That just seems way smarter to me, because that mirrors what happens on disk as well. This I think that was just, generally speaking, kind of a dumb idea. And in fact, we may even want to make it so that it's all just one array. It doesn't even matter, and we just have a union for the 2 bits of info that you need. Because if you look at, like, for example, in here, what the actual amount is, if the amounts are fairly similar size-wise, then we don't even really need to represent the 2 of them separately like that. So I don't know. I think that may have just been making things more complex for no real reason. So here's what I'm going to do there. I'm just going to go ahead and try that as well, because, you know, I feel like it. So there we go. And then I'm going to say, all right, we've got a union asset, here, asset bitmap info, bitmap, asset sound info, sound, right? I just think that's more interesting. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And that means we're also going to get rid of bitmap infos and the sound infos, and the bitmap count and the sound count as well, probably. I think those just go away, right? So off we go, and let's take a look. So when we do get bitmap with the bitmap ID, really all we have to do is assert here that it's less than the asset count, right? And so on. That's really it. Asset count. We could try to verify that the thing, we could have like debug information here that's whether or not the thing's a sound or not, if that makes sense. But I don't really know how much I care about that. We'll see if we have any bugs of that form. So sound infos is not a member of game assets. You are correct. So if we want to actually get the sound info, what we would have to do is ask for just the assets ID value, sound. I believe that's it, right? And the same would be true here, right? If we're trying to get the bitmap info for something, we would have work assets, assets dot bitmap, right? Yeah, and so I really think that's pretty much it in terms of what's going on here. Sound. And let's see. Debug used bitmap count. So debug add bitmap info. Now we're going to do exactly what I said we should do before. We're going to put that right here. So asset slot ID is just not a thing anymore. Instead, we're going to do it this way, where we do asset bitmap.filename and asset bitmap.align percentage. That just seems better all around anyway. Oops, got to put an address in there. And then we've got, let's see, add sound info, same thing here, asset count. And we've got our sound infos, so that's just going to be assets ID value, oops, ID value.sound. There we go. And yeah, what did I just do accidentally? That's not what I wanted. There we go. So bitmap count, bitmap infos, and bitmaps, all these things just go away. Goodbye. Those are gone. We then have our total asset count. I don't know what our total asset count actually is. I guess we just did 256 times asset count for these guys, so I don't know. The asset count is now 2 times 256. I don't even know. That's just, we don't even care about that. Again, that's going to be corrected by our file stuff. All right, so assets, last music slot ID dot sound. There we go. And that's just reaching in there to change that one value. So I think that's really it, if that makes sense. I think that's all. So let's see if that works. It does not at all. Let's take a look at why it doesn't work. The ID value, bitmap. What are you asking for here? ID value 0. Slots is null? What? Do I not allocate slots? I must have missed something. That looks like I missed something stupid. Let's take a look. Oh, well, that's just me not ever actually bothering to allocate that. Slots, slot. So yeah, that was just a slight oversight there. Never bothered to actually allocate the array. So my bitmaps are broken, as you can see, but my sound is working, which is interesting. Kind of amusing. All right, so what did we do wrong there? Let's take a look. We have our sound asset and our sound, like I said, we have our sounds are working just fine. Wait a minute. How did this... What happened here? Oh, that's the problem. We never finished the slot ID thing. So slot IDs are supposed to go away. That's the problem. Yeah, that's just crazy. And also, how did add sound info still work? Ah, okay. So this is also kind of bogus. Yeah, let me go ahead and put this in here. Here we go. There we go. So this should also be something that kind of just happens directly in here. Right? I ported that a little too literally. So what we want to do here is say asset sound.filename, set sound.firstSampleIndex, sample count, next to play. There we go. Okay. And for good measure, you know what? I think I might just return the asset from this one as well, because why not? There we go. Even though we're not going to use these eventually. All right, so now I should get some errors on the slot ID, which was what was actually supposed to happen. And so all I need to do now is actually return the asset index, because that's always going to be the actual index that we want, right? We no longer have to think about the slot ID. The asset index is fine. All right, so in this case, we've got the asset index. And in fact, now we don't even need to look up the asset, right? The result is literally just this. So that's kind of cool too. Now we don't have that dereference, which is awesome, right? Let's take a look here. Result is asset slot ID, same exact thing. The result is now just this. So this simplifies a lot of code too. So I kind of like this change. Sorry, I'm a little over. I think we should be ending right now, but I'm going to go another 5 minutes just to finish this change up because I think it's a good change. So yeah, we've got assets. We don't need to do any of that. This music is actually just the thing we actually wanted, right? We already got the asset back, so now we can just set it. So that code got simpler. And of course, this music itself. Well, unfortunately, that's a little tricky, though, because we don't know what the actual index of the asset is when we added it, which we actually need here. So that's a little trickier. So add sound asset. What we may want to do here is actually return the index, not the asset pointer, right? So we could just return the asset index here. And I don't know if we want an actual asset ID thing. We've got bitmap. Oh, well, I guess we've got sound ID and bitmap ID, which is what those are, right? So there we go. So you can see here we've got the actual values. So our bitmap ID, or I should say, yeah, our bitmap ID is just this guy, right? There we go. Value. I think it's dot value. I don't even remember what it is. Result. And the same would be true here for the sound ID, right? The sound ID is going to be this guy. There we go. And so now when these guys come back, right, it's actually going to be a sound ID that comes back for this music. And then assuming that it's the last one, how is this working? It's actually the last music that was supposed to be, right? There we go. Do we have an is valid for these guys? I don't know if we actually do. We do. Right. So if last music is valid, then what we would want to do is say, you know, the last music asset, excuse me, the last music asset, its sound next to play, right? Excuse me. Its sound next to play's value is going to be whatever this music, whatever its value was, right? Whoops. There we go. Cannot convert side to uint32. Is it actually uint32? The next to play? Next to play. There we go. All right. Lovely. Okay, so I like that a lot better. So there we go. We kind of did a nice little architectural change there that just simplified things. So now we have a much more straightforward thing. We just have asset slots, assets, and tags. The slots could be unified with the assets probably, you know, if we wanted to. I don't think that would be a problem, right? You can imagine, because right now we've got the asset slot. Go ahead and pull that down here to where the actual asset is. So there you go. You can see the asset here. And so you can see that really all it would be is these additional pointers for the slots. So I don't know if we want to do that. We could unify them, we could not. They're two parallel arrays now. Probably doesn't matter whether we do or if we don't, but you know, if it turned out to be some kind of cache locality thing that we actually cared about, maybe we would, but we can leave it like that for now. So that was pretty nice. I like that change. Simplifies this stuff quite a bit, reduces the amount of code. Anything that reduces the amount of code is good. And so that's pretty much, I think, what we want to do there. So yeah, I'm going to leave it there. And I'm going to say that the test asset builder will be what we'll pick back up on tomorrow. We've already kind of gotten a little bit through it, but you know, we should probably be able to get writing out a file tomorrow. And then maybe the day after that, we'll do reading that file into the actual game. So yeah, I'm pretty happy with where that is. For now, let's go ahead and go to the Q&A. And so anyone who has questions, now is a great time to ask them. Put Q: in front of them so I will see them. Around how many lock is the product so far? I don't know. We've been keeping it pretty good. I always forget how to run this tool. I think can I just say the directory? Lock handmade. So 8,300 looks like. I don't know how many it'll be by the time we're done, but you know, game code kind of tends to proliferate that amount. So I feel like, you know, we'll probably be able to do the engine in 20,000 lines of code, no problem, right? Probably less. But the game code may make that a larger number. You mentioned LZ compression of assets. Will we write the compression algorithm? Well, it will, at the very least, we'll write the decompression part. I don't know that we'll bother writing a compressor, but we will write a decompressor. Again, everything from the asset file up, I'm not going to cover. So once we spec the asset file, that's the end of that. We'll just assume that somebody somewhere is writing out our asset file in the spec that we've defined. So. Are we using bitmaps for any other reason than how easily they can be processed? We're not really using bitmaps, if that makes sense. The reason that we're loading bitmaps right now is because they were the easiest thing to show people how to load. As an example, when we were sort of like teaching the very basics of programming stuff. So really, the asset pack file will not be storing things in BMP format. The asset pack file will be storing them in just a raw, raw pixels, basically, right? So yeah, we won't really be using bitmaps. The actual shipping code, and probably as early as next week, will no longer be using bitmaps at all. Only the thing that packs the asset file would potentially be loading bitmaps, but like I said, that's not really of a concern. What does union do when used in the struct? It basically says that these two things overlap in storage, right? So if you have a union here, like this one, what it says is, I don't need both of these at the same time. I'm only going to use one of them, so overlap the storage. So like these two things here, when I say asset, I'm saying I want space for both the uint32 for the first tag asset and the uint32 for one past the last one. Right? I want these two. I want storage for both of these. But here, because an asset is either a sound or a bitmap, I know I only need one of them. So I just tell the compiler, hey, store these overlapping, and I'm going to address one or the other based on which one I want. And I don't care. I don't need you to store the data separately. So what will actually happen in practice, and in fact, you know what? I can show you this. Let me actually show you this in practice so you can see what I'm talking about. So here's the thing. Here's the code to add a bitmap asset, right? So if I come in here, oh, this is adding tags, which I don't really care about. Let's add an actual bitmap asset. There we go. So here's the asset struct. Okay, in memory, right? And you can see me expanding it out. So here's the asset struct. Here's the two things I asked for separately. And then here's the two things that I asked for to be overlapping, right? Now, what you can see about these things is that if I were to take their address, right? So like, let me take the address of asset first tag index, right? And now let me take the address of one past last tag index. Oops. You can see that the addresses are 4 bytes apart because they're separate places in memory, right? In fact, if I go to a memory view here and I copy this in, so now we're looking at, oh God, what did you just do? Thank you, Visual Studio. So if I look at these, right, you can actually see that they're at different locations, right? So now if I write to them, right, you can see I just wrote to one of them, and you can see it updated here. And now we're going to write to one, and you can see that I wrote to it updated here, right? So then they're stored separately, right? They're two separate values. So if I wanted to, I could change this one, right? I could say it actually is a 10, and it understands that, right? That's where it is, right, in memory. But now what happens when I access the shared struct? So now I'm going to say bitmap file name equals this thing. Well, watch what happens, right? Here's bitmap file name, and here's sound file name. Do you see how they both change? And the reason for that is that the memory is the same. This right here is the memory for that thing, right? And it's using the same memory for both. So now, and when I talk about align percentage, it's going to overwrite these values because they're stored in the same places, right? You see how it overwrote those? Because the memory for storing them is the same. And so if I go in here and I change sample count to something, right? I overwrote what was in the y parameter because they're in the exact same place in memory. So that's what a union means. A union means basically overlay these two things in memory because I know I'm only going to use one or the other at a given time, and so I don't care if their memory coincides. Did I see an off-by-one error on assigning bitmap ID? That increment correct. Let's take a look. I'm looking at the wrong code, first of all. So I'm not sure which code you're talking about. If you're talking about this code, that is as expected. This is saying I want the next ID that's available, which is this one. And once I've taken it, I want you to increment it so that it is no longer going to get used by someone else, right? Same is true for the one down here. So I don't think so, unless you're talking about something else. Okay, so looks like only off-topic questions are left. I'll see if there's any useful ones. Opinions on specialized game development universities like DigiPen? No, I do not have one. I've never been to a specialized university or a university for that matter at all as a student, so I really don't know much about them. Any thoughts about Unreal Engine 4? No, I have not used Unreal Engine 4. How did you start learning C, C++? School or self-taught? Self-taught. I learned when I was a pretty little kid. Have you considered having a keyboard cam so we can see your lightning fingers? No, I haven't. Maybe someday we'll do a stream where I just point it down, I guess, at the keyboard. Did you program during the weeks missed? On Handmade Hero, no. I never touch Handmade Hero except on stream. So there's never any code changes that are not broadcast live, ever. Well, I should say, there are never any code changes that aren't recorded. Sometimes there are code changes that aren't broadcast live because either Twitch goes down or my internet goes down or something like that. In that case, they don't quite get broadcast live. But they are all recorded and they are all always available on the YouTube archive. And most of the time, 99% of the time, they are broadcast live. All right, looks like we are done. Looks like we are done for the day. All right, good work today, people. That was good for the first day back. I think we are in good shape. Let me go ahead and save our mischief here. So yeah, thank you everyone for joining me for another edition of Handmade Hero. It's been a pleasure coding with you as always. I'm pleased with where we are in the asset system. I think we're in good shape for tomorrow to kind of start writing one out and loading it in. Well, we probably write it out tomorrow, load it in the next day. But it's all looking pretty good, and I like that sort of cleanup we did to the asset system today. It took a little complexity out of it that I think was not necessary, and that's always good. Sometimes the most productive work you do will be with the delete key. That is a quote that I am happy to say. I did not make it. I believe Rudy Celebresi said it first back when he was an intern at Microsoft. I have no idea what happened to him, but he said it and it's true. So anyway, thank you for joining me. If you would like to follow along with the source code at home, you can always pre-order the game on handmadehero.org. It comes with a source code and you can download it every night from a link that you will get in your email when you pre-order. You can also go to our forum site and ask questions on the forums. If you're trying to learn, it's a good place to go. There's also an annotated episode guide maintained by the community. Some hardworking folks who actually go there and annotate episodes for you to view. It's pretty darn awesome, actually. There's also some ports to Mac and Linux that people have been working on in case you want to follow on a different platform before we get there. So good stuff like that. There's also a Patreon page if you just want to support the video series. You can subscribe to that. And we also have a tweet bot you can subscribe to if you just want to know when the series is going to be live. It will tweet the schedule every weekend, and it also tweets like upcoming in an hour kind of tweets to you. So if you're trying to plan around it, it's pretty easy to follow. That's about it for today. Hope to see you guys all back here tomorrow, 5 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time on Twitch, just like today. Until then, have fun programming, and I will see you guys on the internet. Take it easy, everyone.